Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda, and we are starting a new book. We are on Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley. Elizabeth Keckley was born a slave. She bought her freedom, and she eventually began working as the personal seamstress for Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife. And this was during the time that Lincoln was president, right smack in the middle of the Civil War. So, the full name of the book is Behind the Scenes or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. As I said, it's by Elizabeth Keckley. I wanted to go back to Romanticism for a moment. I'm pretty sure when I talked about it a time ago or a couple times ago, I was talking about realism and not Romanticism. 19th century Romanticism wasn't like romance novels that we think about today. It was about the individual and personal experience and emotion, but it wasn't necessarily about romantic love, or at least what we think of as romantic love. And I wanted to mention that because as I was flipping through the preface, which we're about to read, she being Keckley, mentioned something about her life was romantic. I don't remember exactly what she said, but we'll get to it. And I was like, I think I told the people wrong. I apologize for telling you wrong. This is me trying to get it straight. I've read this. I don't remember at all what happens in it. So it will be like a whole brand new experience for all of us. I am going to read the preface. Sometimes I'm not reading the foreword or the introduction. Those aren't covered by copyright, but anyway, I am going to read the preface. It was written by Keckley, and it's important to read prefaces and introductions and forewords. They help you understand what you are getting into, and they often contextualize what you will be reading in the work that is coming up. So I wanted to make sure that we read the preface and got to hear Keckley's voice about her story that she's going to be telling. So let's begin. Preface. I have often been asked to write my life, as those who know me know that it has been an eventful one. At last I have acceded to the importunities of friends and have hastily sketched some of the striking incidents that go to make up my history. My life so full of romance, there it is. My life so full of romance may sound like a dream to the matter-of-fact reader. Nevertheless, everything I have written is strictly true. Much has been omitted, but nothing has been exaggerated. I'm going to have to stop here for a minute. So this is not starting like many slave narratives start. Often slave narratives start with appeal to the readers, which I guess this is, but they're normally more like, oh, I was this slave and now I am this person. Like they're trying to manage their authenticity and help people understand that they are authentic. And they often have somebody white also be like, yeah, this person is who they really said they were. So she has some of that. Like she talks about striking incidents that go to make up my history. And she says, everything I have written is strictly true. I have read some things that said she had fictionalized some things. I don't know if she did or if she didn't, but she says here, everything I have written is strictly true. Much has been omitted, but nothing has been exaggerated. And that happens in every life story that is told. But putting this in your preface right up front really makes me wonder, what did you omit and why? Because it's important as a reader to think about not only what is in the text, but what isn't in the text. What did you think should have been there and why isn't it there? Which reminds me, just the other day, I was reading something that said, reading for literary study is a bona fide brain workout. We're doing brain workouts, y'all. Brain workout. All right, I'll keep going. In writing as I have done, I am well aware that I have invited criticism. But before the critic judges harshly, let my explanation be carefully read and weighed. If I have portrayed the dark side of slavery, I also have painted the bright side. Who even knew there was a bright side of slavery? To good that I have said of human servitude should be thrown into the scales with the evil that I have said of it. I have kind, true-hearted friends in the South as well as in the North, and I would not wound those Southern friends by sweeping condemnation simply because I was once a slave. Well, that's very big of her. She has friends in the North and the South, and she's not going to be mean to her Southern friends just because they are a part and parcel of the system of slavery. They were not so much responsible for the curse under which I was born as the God of nature and the fathers who framed the Constitution for the United States. Ooh. She was like, I was born a slave because of God and the fathers who framed the Constitution. Okay, she ain't pulling any punches. The law descended to them, and it was but natural that they should recognize it, since it manifestly was their interest to do so. And yet a wrong was inflicted upon me. A cruel custom deprived me of my liberty, and since I was robbed of my dearest right, I would not have been human had I not rebelled against the robbery. Absolutely. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, an inalienable right. So she said that she was born with that right having been stolen from her, and she would not have been human had she not rebelled against that theft. Oh, I like her already. God rules the universe. I was a feeble instrument in his hands, and through me and the enslaved millions of my race, one of the problems was solved that belongs to the great problem of human destiny. And the solution was developed so gradually that there was no great convulsion of the harmonies of natural laws. A solemn truth was thrown to the surface, and what is better still, it was recognized as a truth by those who give force to moral laws. An act may be wrong, but unless the ruling power recognizes the wrong, it is useless to hope for a correction of it. Let's read that again. I hope we make it through this preface. An act may be wrong, but unless the ruling power recognizes the wrong, it is useless to hope for a correction of it. So is wrong, something can be wrong all day long, but if the people in power don't recognize that it's wrong, nothing is going to be done. Principles may be right, but they are not established within an hour. The masses are slow to reason, and each principle, to acquire moral force, must come to us from the fire of the crucible. The fire may inflict unjust punishment, but then it purifies and renders stronger the principle, not in itself, but in the eyes of those who arrogate judgment to themselves. When the War of the Revolution established the independence of the American colonies, an evil was perpetuated. Slavery was more firmly established. I don't know if you see this on the screen, but I got a pop-up that says verifying OneDrive. Not sure why OneDrive is getting verified, but let's minimize that. I don't know if you saw it or not. I didn't like it there, though. Okay, so she's saying when the American colonies established themselves, they also firmly established slavery, which we know to be true. And since the evil had been planted, it must pass through certain stages before it could be eradicated. In fact, we give but little thought to the plant of evil until it grows to such monstrous proportions that it overshadows important interests. Then the efforts to destroy it become earnest. As one of the victims of slavery, I love that. At no point, well, she said because I was once a slave, but she's like, I was a victim of slavery. I like that language. It was something that was inflicted upon her. I said she was born a slave. I shouldn't have. She was born into slavery, but she was not born a slave. My bad. All right, let me get back to the book. As one of the victims of slavery, I drank of the bitter water. But then, since destiny willed it so, and since I aided in bringing a solemn truth to the surface as a truth, perhaps I have no right to complain. Here, as in all things pertaining to life, I can afford to be charitable. It may be charged that I have written too freely on some questions, especially in regard to Mrs. Lincoln. I do not think so. At least I have been prompted by the purest motive. Mrs. Lincoln, by her own acts, forced herself into notoriety. She stepped beyond the formal lines which hedge about a private life and invited public criticism. The people have judged her harshly, and no woman was ever more traduced in the public prints of the country. The people knew nothing of the secret history of her transactions, therefore they judged her by what was thrown to the surface. For an act may be wrong judged purely by itself, but when the motive that prompted the act is understood, it is construed differently. I lay it down as an axiom. She is laying down axioms. She's like, maybe I said too much about Mrs. Lincoln, but I don't think so. She put herself out there. That's on her. And I'm about to drop some truth knowledge bombs on you. I lay it down as an axiom that only that is criminal in the sight of God where crime is meditated. Mrs. Lincoln may have been imprudent, but since her intentions were good, she should be judged more kindly than she has been. She says this, and I believe she means it, but at the same time, she's like, I am justified in saying whatever I have said about Mrs. Lincoln, A, because it's true, because she already mentioned the veracity of everything she is saying, and B, because Mrs. Lincoln put herself out there in the public eye. Oh! But the world do not know what her intentions were. They have only been made acquainted with her acts without knowing what feeling guided her actions. And I am not up on my history. I don't know what she did that got all this hullabaloo going on. If the world were to judge her as I have judged her, they must be introduced to the secret history of her transactions. The veil of mystery must be drawn aside. The origin of a fact must be brought to light with the naked fact itself. If I have betrayed confidence in anything I have published, it has been to place Mrs. Lincoln in a better light before the world. So she is saying, I have to pull back the curtain and show you everything that was going on that prompted Mrs. Lincoln to do the things that she did, whatever those things were. And even though I may face criticism, and it may seem that I am besmirching the good name of Mrs. Lincoln, what I am doing in effect is giving you the backstory so she, being Mrs. Lincoln, she can be seen in a better light, or I will add, at least people will better understand why she did whatever it was that she did. Thank you, Elizabeth Keckley. A breach of trust, if breach it can be called, of this kind is always excusable. My own character, as well as the character of Mrs. Lincoln, is at stake, since I have been intimately associated with that lady in the most eventful periods of her life. I have been her confidant, and if evil charges are laid at her door, they also must be laid at mine, since I have been a party to all her movements. To defend myself, I must defend the lady that I have served. The world have judged Mrs. Lincoln by the facts which float upon the surface, and through her have partially judged me. And the only way to convince them that wrong was not meditated is to explain the motives that actuated us. Okay, so she's saying, since I am so closely aligned with Mrs. Lincoln, if you think ill of her, you're going to think ill of me. And let's set the record straight. I have written nothing that can place Mrs. Lincoln in a worse light before the world than the light in which she now stands. She's like, I'm not making anything worse, y'all. Therefore, the secret history that I publish can do her no harm. I have excluded everything of a personal character from her letters. Oh, and there are letters from Mrs. Lincoln at the end of the book in the appendix, so we'll get to those, and maybe there are some sprinkled throughout. I have excluded everything of a personal character from her letters. The extracts introduced only refer to public men and are such as to throw light upon her unfortunate adventure in New York. So while I was questioning earlier, what was it that she has omitted? She has omitted everything of a personal character from the letters that she and Mrs. Lincoln shared, and she and Keckley only refers to people who are already out in the public light doing the things that they have done in public. So what we are getting is basically her redaction of things that happened. I love it. Like, I want the full thing because that's what I always want. But I like it that she has explained to us how she has redacted things. And we're totally going to get through the preface. We only have a little bit more than a page left. These letters were not written for publication, for which reason they are all the more valuable. They are the frank overflowings of the heart, the outcropping of impulse, the key to genuine motive. They prove the motive to have been pure, and if they shall help to stifle the voice of calumny, I am content. I do not forget, before the public journals vilified Mrs. Lincoln, that ladies who moved in the Washington circle in which she moved freely canvassed her character among themselves. They gloated over many a tale of scandal that grew out of gossip in their own circle. If these ladies could say everything bad of the wife of the president, why should I not be permitted to lay her secret history bare, especially when that history plainly shows that her life, like all lives, has its good side as well as its bad side? She is like, the housewives of Washington have been talking smack about Mrs. Lincoln the whole time her husband was in the White House. So why can I not say what is true and what happened behind closed doors? I love her. And she's also saying, I'm going to tell you some good things and some bad things because everybody's life has good and bad. And ain't that the truth? None of us are perfect, for which reason we should heed the voice of charity when it whispers in our ears, do not magnify the imperfections of others. Oh, that is a good piece of advice. Do not magnify the imperfections of others. Had Mrs. Lincoln's acts never become public property, I should not have published to the world the secret chapters of her life. I am not the special champion of the widow of our lamented president. The reader of the pages which follow will discover that I have written with the utmost frankness in regard to her, have exposed her faults as well as given her credit for her honest motives. So she was like, had all of this never happened, I would have never done this. But here we are, and I'm going to do it truly. I like where she says, I am not the special champion of the widow of our lamented president. She is like, I am not here to puff anybody up. Just because I worked closely with her does not mean she was my special friend or I was her special friend. I'm going to tell y'all what really happened. And I love that she said that because, and it's been years now, we went on a school field trip to Springfield, Illinois, to Lincoln's Presidential Library. And it was with my son. He was less than fourth grade. I remember that because of the school he was in. And I know he was no longer in that school when he was in fourth grade. So let's say he was in third grade. And we were walking around a display, and part of the display had Elizabeth Keckley. And I was with another mom who was talking about how extraordinary it was that Elizabeth Keckley and Mary Todd Lincoln were best friends. And I was like, I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure they weren't best friends. And she was like, well, what are you talking about? And I said the power differential between them had to exclude legitimate friendship. It just had to. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, you can't be working for somebody and simultaneously be a Black person, and that person you're working for is not only a white person, but the white wife of the white president. Like I just was like, I don't believe that was a true friendship. Elizabeth Keckley may have been a true friend to Mrs. Lincoln, and Mrs. Lincoln may have felt she was a true friend to Elizabeth Keckley. I'm not saying she was in any way not being upright. I'm just saying with that power differential, I doubt Elizabeth Keckley allowed Mrs. Lincoln to really get to know her and be a friend. Again, I don't know. These are speculations on my part. But what I do know is that Elizabeth Keckley said, I am not the special champion of the widow of our lamented president. That's what I do know because I just read it. All right, I will continue. I wish the world to judge her as she is, free from the exaggerations of praise or scandal, since I have been associated with her in so many things that I have provoked hostile. Let's do that again. I wish the world to judge her as she is, free from the exaggerations of praise or scandal, since I have been associated with her in so many things that have provoked hostile criticism, and the judgment that the world may pass upon her, I flatter myself will present my own actions in a better light. Signed, Elizabeth Keckley, 14 Carroll Place, New York, March 14th, 1868. So that was the preface. I'm looking around because I need a what do you call them? A bookmark. So we have jumped into Behind the Scenes by Elizabeth Keckley. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.